we are speaking with Loki Mulholland. Loki is an award-winning film director, and I gave you guys homework this on the last show. I told y'all, I was like, okay, this is homework. I need y'all to watch about 4 different documentaries, and he did, and now he's also doing a podcast called The Uncomfortable Truth. Everything is awesome. And his mom, what tops everything off is that his mother he's also the son of the infamous Joan Trumpauer. Did I say her name right?
You did.
Mulholland. Who is she? She is the white woman that you saw at the Jackson, Mississippi Woolworth Civil Rights counter. So if anybody has ever visited the African American Museum, that particular museum has a replica of the counter. She was the white woman along with Annie, what's her last name again?
Annie Moody.
Yeah. Annie Moody, that was sitting at the counter. Beautiful woman, and I'm just so excited that you're on the show. So guys, please welcome Loki Mulholland.
Yes, thank you. Welcome to the show, Loki.
I appreciate it.
So because this is a genealogy show, we wanted to touch a little bit about the work that you've done. And looking at The Uncomfortable Truth, it was just amazing to see how you had done your family research, traced some lines all the way back to Jamestown. How did you even get into that kind of a journey?
Well, it was interesting because, when I did the film, when I started the film, I don't know if I should say this now, but the original title of the film was actually Why You're a Racist and Didn't Even Know It. And it was more about, the history of institutional racism in America. And I just really felt like at that point when I was writing the script, I'd been working on it, and just really felt like it wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't adding anything new that you weren't hearing anywhere else, like in a BuzzFeed video or wherever. Mm-hmm. And I actually called my mom, just said, I'm just not going to do this, and, she's a mom, she said, you work so hard on it, blah, blah. We had already done our interview with Luvon Brown at that point. And I said, well, I'll think about it. So, I just prayed on it. And I remember distinctly, I was walking down the street with my wife on an evening walk, and the Holy Ghost just said, check your family history. And when that happened, the story my grandmother used to tell us, which is what we lead with in the movie, what we call the 100 slave story, came back to me instantly. And just in a flash, I could see the entire film, played out in front of me. And I turned to my wife and said, the movie's done.
Wow.
But the next day, I kept on dwelling on that. But then the next day on another walk, it was just, I do a lot of thinking when I walk. I do a lot of walking to think. It was like, no, that's a check your family history. That wasn't a check, that was a memory. And that began the adventure of really diving in, into our family history. Now, I live in Utah now. I've been out here for 20 years. I'm a Latter-day Saint, a convert to that church, and so doing family history is, it's kind of our thing, anyways. But I hadn't really dived too far into that, and so this became this big journey. And fortunately, my aunt, my mom's sister, had already done a lot of family history, and that revealed to us this character in the story name that we call her Aunt Mary through the story. Her name is Mary Harris, but that was one of the former enslaved people that ends up being who actually really stayed. I don't want to give too much away in this. I don't know how much we should give away in this, and who's seen the film and so forth, but that's where it started, and digging around and trying to find these different societies like the Chandler Family Society and so forth, and diving back into and unveiling that we had gone all the way back to Jamestown in 1610. He was actually stolen off the streets of London and sold into indentured servitude and shipped to Jamestown.
Because he was 9. He was 9 years old at the time, wasn't he?
Yeah. And at that point, then, when he was freed from indentured servitude, he earned that passage there that he he would go on to marry, and I think probably like George Washington, ended up, marrying a rich person who already, I believe, owned two plantations. And I think part of it was they actually owned most of Hampton Road area, as a matter of fact, down in that region in Norfolk.
Wow. I grew
Oh
up
yeah,
down
our genealogy keeps rubbing shoulders all across Virginia. It sounds like.
Yeah.
So before I ask my next question, I just wanted to let our audience know that I think all of your documentaries are available on Amazon Prime. Is that
there.
correct?
Yes.
Correct.
That's right. So if you haven't checked them out already, because we are going to be referencing them throughout the show, you can find Loki's his documentaries, which, as Danya said, have won awards on Amazon.com, plus your Spotify podcast.
Exactly. And I'm just gonna say this. We're what is it that they say when you might be telling a story, you might be giving away some stuff. What is it? What kind of? It's an alert.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Yeah, because I'm gonna talk about it. And y'all know me. Y'all know me. I'm gonna talk about it. I gave y'all your homework, so
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm letting you know now. It's gonna be a spoiler alert.
So the next question is just for me to get a chronology straight in my head. So
Right.
you start your stories with two very powerful but very simple little stories. What came first, the gummy bear incident or you finding out that your mother was so active in the civil rights?
Oh gosh, no, I knew about my mom for years.
Okay.
Because that documentary called An Ordinary Hero was done in 2011, and because of that sit down I had with Louvain when I interviewed him, what he said in that interview became a catalyst to create The Uncomfortable Truth. And I just, Louvain and I had met just a couple of months earlier at the 50th anniversary of the Freedom Rides down in Jackson. This is 2011. And we hit it off. I mean, I love that he was just going toe to toe with my mom, I think in particular. And him and I have the same sense of humor and everything else. Just there's this just connection, and it's very interesting. And just in and of that is that I don't remember if Louvain says this in the film, but my mother is the first white woman he ever trusted.
Yeah, he did say that in the film.
He did.
Yeah, I probably should watch my movies every now and then.
Because that was a really powerful statement because he
Yeah.
didn't hold any cut cards. He said more than once, I grew up not trusting white people.
Right. And it's interesting because when I actually have a board member who is a white gentleman who actually went to an HBCU, and he was watching the film. This is before the film came out. It was a rough cut. And about halfway through, he calls me up and says, "Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't know this Louvain. I don't know if people are going to connect. I don't think they're going to get it." He goes, "He's really kind of actually kind of rubbing me the wrong way." And I said, "Just keep watching.
Wow.
Just keep watching."
But you see, for me, that's really frustrating because naturally I would think that because of my skin tone. My question would be, well, why? Why did you grow up not trusting white people? What was it in your history or your community's history that would make you feel that way? But I can see where, if you're a bit sensitive on the whole subject of racism, because he is very direct.
He is
is.
blunt.
Look how he grew up. I mean, he's in Mississippi. I mean, it's he was 11 years old when Emmett Till was killed in 1955. He went through a lot and experienced a lot. He also didn't trust a lot of black people either because of his years growing up and stuff too. So I mean, it wasn't just white people, but in particular, that element of race was there because of what he went through under Jim Crow and segregation, and what he saw happen to his grandmother and so forth.
Mhm.
And he's 16 years old and he's thrown in the on a prison farm, for goodness sakes. For the most absurd charges.
I think my thing is that I don't see why people wouldn't connect to him if they didn't listen to his story.
Well, right. But so his fear is that you might lose people, white people,
Okay.
very early on because he says, "Well, I don't like white people," right? And those sort of things. And the things he says very early on become, sound very strident to white people. This is the angry black man. I mean, he is like the epitome of the angry black man to white people. By the time you get beyond that halfway point, you start to understand that connection, because now we're moving into what's taking place today and how we're all downstream of the past. So suddenly you start to agree with them. And that's what I'm getting from a lot of people. I get a lot of emails and Facebook messages and the like, particularly from white people who are saying, I had no idea that this was going on. I had no idea that this was what the real history was. Um, and I don't blame them because it's just not taught in school. Uh, but having Louvain explain it in that fashion, and then seeing my family's story and that connection to it, and particularly my mother and how she fits in that equation of changing the course of our family history, from this slaveholding past into this, growing up under segregation with a grandmother who was mother who's a staunch segregationist, and then becoming this, civil rights icon.
Well, keeping with that, before I ask you to
Yeah.
relay what I call the gummy bear incident on
Yeah.
Facebook, I
There's a
think
lot of those.
there's a lot of those. I think the story that you shared about your mother when she was a young girl, I think she was about 9 or 10,
Mhm.
being dared or losing a bet and having to walk through the black section of town.
Well,
Right.
please say it right. Going through Nigger Town.
Right.
Because we
Okay.
I'm with it. Go
Yeah.
going through Nigger Town, because that's what it was called.
That's what it was
That's
called.
And
that's what it was called. I think what she experienced dovetails perfectly to what you've just been talking about.
Yeah.
So could you share that story with the audience?
Yeah. So, every summer, so they lived in Virginia, in Northern Virginia, in Arlington, and they would drive down every summer, her folks and her sister, down to Georgia, which is where her mother's grandmother lived. And my grandfather was from Iowa, and he was the only foreigner in the family in my grandmother's side, because he was a Yankee, and they never actually ever called him by his first name. He was always known as Mr. Nelson, even to his in-laws.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
striking. Um, so they went down there that summer, and this is the summer of about 51. Um, and there was a rule that you can't go beyond the Coca-Cola bottle. They called it the Coca-Cola bottling plant. It really wasn't, but that's what they just called it. And you definitely couldn't go into the black quarters, um, which was down the road across the tracks, literally type of thing. And so sure enough, on a dare from her friend Mary, they go. My mom and Mary, and when they go into the black quarters, my mother says it's so striking to her because people just seem to disappear, right? African Americans would hide behind their laundry, behind their houses, close the doors, close the shutters, whatever it was. No one wanted to be seen seeing these two little white girls. Now, when you consider that just a few years before that, I think, what was it, 1944 or so, that just up the road in South Carolina, um, George Stinney was electrocuted as a 14-year-old black boy, right? So this is very real in the community, that all that has to happen is all you have to say is, if something happened to my mom, let's say she disappeared, her and Mary disappeared, and police are, of course, they're going to instantly go into the black quarters and say, all right, well, and someone said, oh yeah, I saw them. Oh, I bet you did. Now we got to lynch him, right?
yeah.
That's all that's needed, because that plays into the into the narrative of the black beast rapist, right? That whites have. And so, they stop at the schoolhouse, and she sees this one-room shack. She said there wasn't a lick of paint on it, no glass in the windows. It was on stone piles. There's outhouse, out backs, potbelly stoves. She said there was a hand pump, and you could ladle the water out of basically a trough from the hand pump. But this was in stark contrast to a brand new brick school for the white students. This kind of post World War II brick school, which is actually still the nicest building in Oconee, Georgia today. Now it's an old folks home, so I guess many of the kids who want to go to school there are now actually living in the old folks home. And she just said, it just rattled her soul, and this, separate but equal was not equal, and that this was, she said to herself, this is wrong, and I'm going to do something about it.
Because when you relayed the story, the image that flashed through my head was like those 1950s, 1950s black and white Western TV shows like Gunsmoke or The Big Valley, where the villain comes in, the gunslinger comes into town, and all the
Right.
good town folk literally just vacate the streets, just
Right.
literally run for cover. That's
Or
really
take
the
her out.
sense that yeah, exactly, and that's really the sense that I got when you were relaying just this
Yeah.
really short, seemingly innocent little story about two girls walking through. And I get it, because if anything had happened to them,
Mhm.
anything at all hell would have broken loose.
But in
Exactly.
particular, but imagine the power that two little 10-year-old white girls had embodied in their whiteness
Hmm.
against all these adults. Don't even consider the kids, just the adults, that the power that they had. And they didn't even know it. And yet, I think there's a certain element that you just knew societally, um, that was there. And so it's imprinted upon you. And so then, like Levon talks about, I think he says this in particular in An Ordinary Hero, but that, you know, as a black person, you never wanted to be around a white woman in the South because you never knew what was going to set them off. Is what he says. He says,
Yep.
and suddenly I could, piss off this white woman. Excuse my French, but I'm just quoting. What if I suddenly just pissed off this white woman? That she had all these things in her power to do me in, and he said, and I have nothing I could do about it. And that's what we saw with Emmett Till. Um, the only thing we completely that we know definitively what happened with Emmett Till was that he did whistle. There's nothing else beyond that, and that wasn't even in the store. That was when she walked out of the store, Carolyn Bryant. So, um, you know, all of that is just these white tears, and we see that in Central Park with Annie Cooper, I think her name was, the lady who gets on the phone and she's practically choking her
Mhm.
dog, and they're attacking me. They had this. I mean, she knew exactly what she was doing. She knew she was weaponizing, his color.
Yeah.
Um,
And
Yeah.
again, thinking about the older black people who were in the town, that part of town, they're probably, they would have been aware of things like Tulsa
yeah,
and the community that
Roseville.
got ransacked in Florida and New York, and the
Yeah,
list just goes on, and that would have been that would have been quite real for them.
yeah,
And
very much.
that left an indelible mark on your mother. I would probably say in a lot of ways that changed the course of her life.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, she just couldn't
Mm,
let it go. It just ran completely counter to everything that she knew and believed and what she was taught in church. And as a Presbyterian, and she just said, we were hypocrites. We're teaching love thy neighbor as thyself, and you do unto these, you done the least of these thy brethren. And she says, and we weren't doing that. And
yeah, and I caught that in the film. That's one of the things that really got to me when she started to recite certain, when you can recite a scripture and
yeah,
then compare it, that's what she was doing, and she was doing it as a child.
yeah,
So it was really crazy. And then when she went on to sing the song, Jesus loves the little children, all the little children of the world, red and yellow,
mhm,
black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world, except for the black ones. So
right,
it just
yeah,
that's literally how it hit her, and I could see it, because then she turned around and said, well, maybe I just take things too literally.
right,
And I'm like, okay, so now I have a white mom and I'm in love, because she literally came off and said that. She was like, yeah, I just kind of take things too literal. I take things literally.
mhm,
And how else are you going to take it? You can't tell me that this is what it means, but it only means this for certain things or for certain people. And
right,
she caught that as a child, and I thought that was awesome.
yeah, yeah. And
So
sometimes I got her in trouble, and sometimes it helped her out tremendously. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, at the end of the day, it was we need to if we're taught certain principles like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and all those sort of things, that we should all be practicing that. And she just obviously just said, that's just not what it was. And she loves the South. She actually refused to marry someone because he wanted to leave the South. He wanted to move to New York, and she's like, I ain't leaving there. Uh, so she wanted to make the South the best that it could be, the best qualities of the South, and do away with segregation and Jim Crow.
Wow.
Well, we have a good quick question for you from Elizabeth Torres. It's a kind of a long question, so I'm gonna boil it down.
All right. Yeah.
She's curious about where the term Black Quarters came from in the Georgia town. Did that have anything to do with slave quarters, or that was just what that community was referred to as?
It's interesting. I think it's what the community referred to it as. So actually, when we were down there shooting, thank you, Elizabeth, for this question. That's a great question. I'm very curious myself. But so we actually ran into people who knew my great grandmother and could point out exactly where the house would have been and these sort of things. And we're actually standing there talking to this one gentleman whose car he was pulled up, in the middle of the road type of thing, and was telling us this stuff. Well, then I said, well, we better get out of the road. Here comes another car. He goes, oh, that's just my brother. He's being nosy. This is a really old guy. And so finally I just said, and this is like this very cordial conversation. We're having this, we're talking about, family stories. He goes, actually, yeah, I actually traded a motorcycle for some raccoons with with my mom's cousin, right? I mean, it's this crazy sort of funny stuff. And then I said, well, hey, we're trying to find where the Black Quarters was. Where's that at? And by this time, his brother had shown up, the nosy brother, right? And when that happened after the introductions, I said, well, actually, we're looking for the Black Quarters. Can you point us where those were? And suddenly the conversation just completely changed. Like, well, hey, have a nice day. We hope you guys have a great visit. And they were gone.
Wow.
I mean, just that quick. They didn't even want to talk.
Wow.
Yeah, it was striking. And there was a gentleman there, African American gentleman, who he was about my age, and he pointed out to where it was, but would not take us back there. And he was like, yeah, Black people in the woods don't work out well here. And eventually he did, once I found where the entrance was. And I had walked back back into this area where I thought it could have been. And it was walking back and just like, my gosh, I'm just not finding anything. I was like, man, we came all this way. I really want to find an old road or something like that. I mean, I kind of knew the indications of what from watching old Indiana Jones films and stuff. Okay, I think I could figure out where this might fit. Uh, and so I was just like, yeah, I stopped and prayed and turned around. And my view was very clear at that point of going, I was actually walking on the road. That was all covered over and grown over and everything else, but you can see where the indentation would have been.
So
so I followed that out
mm-hmm.
and came out to the spot on the railroad tracks, which actually was across from where this new road had turned and stopped at the tracks. And so when I found, we went back and found the gentleman. I said, well, can you tell me if this is the spot? And he goes, yeah, this is actually the spot. And he walked into the woods with us and, just short distance and started pointing out where people's houses used to be.
Your journey, woods and railroad tracks, they're just that metaphor always keeps popping up. You just said something really evocative, and I can't let that go without asking a follow-up question.
Go ahead. I know where this is going.
What do you think the gentleman meant about woods, Black people, and not ending terribly well?
Oh, getting lynched.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So it wasn't. So it wasn't fear of haunting spirits or anything else. It literally was just the history.
I think there might have been a little bit of that. I mean, I don't want to get too superstitious.
Oh, you can.
And then I don't want to project on that gentleman.
Okay. Fair enough.
But definitely,
we believe.
There is an element of that.
Yeah, we believe. I mean, we have gone through our own. Both Brian and I have both written books, and we've gone through our own overall journeys as far as family members and ancestors who really guiding us and talking with us and everything. So, spirits coming out and saying something, saying, yeah, go ahead and do this. We believe. I mean, just from your praying. Yeah, it has everything to do with it because it's only allowed through him. It's right. For somebody like me, it's only allowed through him. So if that's the case, and you're praying, you're already talking to them, and they're already going to make their presence known and make their feelings known. So we're believers.
Right on. Hey, yeah, I just think in particular it was from an historical standpoint.
And also, that's the second incident where you've tried to find a black cemetery and really weren't able to find what you were looking for. And
Right.
I have my own thoughts about that. I'm sure Dawn will have her
That
thoughts in
wasn't
our
a black
audience.
cemetery. That was a black town.
That was the town,
That
though.
That
was
was
the
the
Yeah,
town.
yeah.
that
He
was the
was looking
black
for the
quarters.
town.
Oh, that was
Yeah.
the whole town.
That was a whole town that was gone. And that was a logging town. So they actually, when the logging mill closed, they actually took the town with them.
Okay.
So yeah, so there was
But
a main
still,
black quarters, which was still separated from the main white part of town, and it was those sort of things. But no, that old black quarters, not at all. It was completely gone. I mean, a whole town was gone.
Wow.
Section.
with nothing to mark that it.
Right.
Brian, your thing is your sound is messing up again. So while Brian is trying to fix his sound, I want to get into after Selma, and I want to talk more. So after Selma, spoiler alert, after Selma is a documentary about voting, and basically talking about what it took for them to go across that bridge and how the voting has now changed. Um, Loki did an excellent job by showing comparisons for the voter ID, the gerrymandering, the voter fraud, just how they're closing polls. This film was done in 2019. I want to know, like, what made you actually want to go into doing something like that?
Um, well, so I had met Joanne Blackman Bland probably a couple years before that, and yeah, she it was interesting. So I was actually on a project. We were going basically a civil rights tour and capturing that for this education company called Studies Weekly here in Utah, and um, it was on the anniversary. It was around the anniversary of the James Meredith March, and so we knew that there's going to be a large congregation of Mississippi civil rights workers and stuff in Jackson. So let's fly to Georgia, get some stuff there, and drive out um, to Jackson and make a grand tour of Little Rock and Memphis and all these different places. So uh, we knew we wanted to get the Edmund Pettus Bridge and get some interviews with people who had marched on the Edmund Pettus Bridge that were there. There's the museum that was there, and this name kept popping up, which was Joanne Bland, and I couldn't get her to answer the phone and do an interview, and she come to find out also wasn't had a history like Lou Vaughn's, um, and so was very not just very apprehensive about white people. Why do you want an interview? What's this about? Um, and so we get there and we're doing these interviews with this other group of people, and then I said, well, hey, what about Joanne Bland? Is she around? Oh yeah, she lives right up the road. Let me give her a call. So we came over and I sat down at the table, just in her dining room or in the kitchen table, and well, what do you want an interview for? What about this? What about that? And these sort of things. And I'm just like, oh gosh. So finally, I just pulled out my business card, which has my mother's mugshot. So this is my card for my foundation, but it has my mom's Freedom Rider mugshot, and I put that across the table, and she's like, well, your mom was one of the Freedom Riders. I'm like, yeah. She goes, all right, you're okay. We can do this. I'm like, all right. And then come to find out that Joanne's sister is also a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority incorporated, so that helped because my mom is also a Delta. So now fast forward a couple years later, and I really wanted to do a film about Joanne. Her story is very riveting, and ended up that she doesn't want to tell her story to that extent. But I said, well, what if we did it about voter suppression? And I had read Carol Anderson's book White Rage, and One Person No Vote, and so I said, well, what if we did that and have Selma, the town, be a representation of what's been going on? Because all too often, we see the movie Selma, and wow, Selma looks really like a nice little town. Well, it's not anymore. But we've trapped ourselves in this idea of what Selma should look like, um, along with voting rights. Well, they had the Selma to Montgomery March in '65, and shortly thereafter is the Voting Rights Act. So clearly everyone can vote. Well, no, it's just like Selma has decayed, so has our right to vote. Um, And so that's how that came to be, and I wanted to make sure I had it out. So 1 year before the 2020 election, um, so people can understand what's at stake.
Yes.
So actually, this has been a sad couple of days for your family. I mean, they've lost three
Yeah,
major civil rights leaders within, well, 2 days.
2 days,
yeah,
So
right?
Reverend Vivian,
yeah.
John Lewis, and I can't remember her first name, but Mrs. Saunders.
You're right.
So literally three. So it must be a sad weekend for your family.
Yeah, we just actually just in early March. We were there with John and Joanne and Ruby Bridges and such on the bridge. We were actually did a ceremonial march to the top of the bridge. They don't go all the way anymore, but that was the last march he did on that bridge,
Wow.
and so to be able to be there, yeah, Reverend Lawson and such, and it was just it was beautiful. John was an incredible person. I didn't know him that well myself. My mom had knew him since 61, um, but every time I interacted with John, just an incredible individual, and every time I remember one in particular. We were at the 50th commemoration of King's assassination. We were at Memphis at the Lorraine Motel and the National Civil Rights Museum, and there's this big event going on. Everyone's there. Marion Wright Edelman and Michael Eric Dyson. I mean, everyone's there, right? So young and old, and we walk in. My mom's like, "Where's John?" I'm like, "I'll go find him, Mom." So because I could move a little faster than her, and people were stopping to talk to her. So I go and I'm walking up to John, and there's John and oh gosh, Bernard Lafayette standing together, and I walk up and John waves me over and takes my hand and pulls me in. Says, "Where's your mother?" I said, "Well, hi, John. It's good to see you." I said, "You know, here, John. She's coming." Uh, so yeah, so it was always just it was always that way. It's like anytime they would get together or any of the civil rights people get together, it's like a homecoming.
So for you, is it how frustrating is it given what's happening in the here and now compared to the stories that you heard from these really towering kind of civil rights people back in the
Right.
60s? How do you feel about that? That we're still having the same arguments, conversations, pushback, police violence, all of that stuff.
It is frustrating. Well, quite frankly, I mean, they were fighting the same fight that was being fought during Reconstruction when African American men, got the right to vote, and that suppression that was taking place, and then the work that was being done against lynchings in the early 1900s in particular, and Red Summer and stuff. So, um, with Ida B. Wells, and then also the formation of the NAACPs at that time. So there's always a fight going on. And it's like, my gosh, man, when are we ever going to get past this? But also what you're seeing is that with this, every time you make a couple steps forward, there's going to be that reaction, that white lash that takes place, and we're seeing that, which means that we've made some progress. This is all a response to Obama. Let's just be honest, and it's a response to the fact that the country is getting browner. Um, and that there's this realization that actually things are changing and they have to change, and the status quo cannot stay the same, and uh, it's also very hopeful. That's one of the things I've heard as well, is that the response, even though there's this negative, and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and the voter suppression and all these things are taking place, but that the fact that people are out there, and particularly the fact that there's a lot of white people out there, is a very stark contrast to what took place, which means that more white people are actually becoming more aware that this is, that they're just not putting up with it anymore. And they might have sat on the sidelines, and maybe there's just a little bit of that, social media energy out of it, that, hey, I want to make sure I'm being seen. But more so, people are actually standing up and standing out instead of standing back. And so,
yeah. And I find the response to his presidency, to Barack Obama's presidency, really I find it interesting, because I was living in England pretty much for the entirety of his presidency, except for maybe the last 4 months. And we're talking about a man, every president makes mistakes, but he got the economy on track. he started getting Americans jobs. He, kind of made up for the faults of the previous administration. So it's not like he left the country in this disastrous state.
Oh, but he's black.
Um,
Let's
it's as
be honest.
simple as that.
I mean, he
Okay.
wore a tan suit for goodness sakes.
Yes, I remember.
Right?
We even heard about that in England.
Right. I mean, it's absurd. I mean, it's completely absurd. No one questions the legitimacy of any other president's birth certificate.
No.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, okay.
those subtle sort of certain things. There's just that's just par for the course. The fact is that like Levon says in Uncomfortable Truth, we have a black man in our White House.
Yeah, he did say that.
We got to take back
and
our White House.
yeah, and the thing is that you made a comment just earlier, and you said that we're always fighting this fight and so on and so forth, and but you're like, now we're hopeful about it, but this fight is not the first time we fought it, and so what makes you feel like it's different now? Because I actually agree with you. I do feel like this fight seems different than the earlier ones, but what do you think makes it different?
Well, for one, we have to recognize a couple of things. So one, and I said this on stage once with my mom at I think it was Washington State, and my mom and I, we speak a lot on events and things. We get asked to come and do a screening of the film and speak, whatever else. And I was it's like I'm going to throw a zinger at my mom and see how she responds. I've been working on this for a while, and we're sitting there on stage, the panelists and so forth, the moderator. I said, well, the civil rights activists took care of the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit, but they never actually took care of the foundation of racism. My mom was like, oh. I was like, oh my. And later on, she was like, all right, now explain that to me. I said, well, and that's actually what ends up in the film, The Uncomfortable Truth, is that we've never actually taken care of this foundation of racism. So now you took care of the important outward manifestations, which psychologically and physically and everything else are vital in regards to the buses and the lunch counters and the water, the water fountains and those sort of things. All of those things are vital, and obviously voting rights and these important things. I don't want to, I'm not downplaying at all, but that foundation still remained, which allowed, that new structure to be built. The colorblind society. Now you have the war on drugs and mass incarceration and school prison pipeline and all these things to maintain the status quo, just to rewrap that. Now, having said that, this is a journey. Someone says, well, when did the civil rights movement start? And I'm like, and someone will always say, well, in 1955. I'm like, okay, well, no, it started, at the very beginning, right? We could say it started 1619, right? But the fact of the matter is that we've always been on this journey, and you have flashpoints, you have moments. So the civil rights movement is a great example, because most people will point to, well, in 1954 you had the Brown versus Board of Education, and then 1964 is the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
But in between all that's 10 long years. In between that, you had these momentous moments.
Right.
The March on Washington, you name it, right? Those were these highs and lows that would take place, but the work was always going through, right? So the Voting Rights Act didn't suddenly just, all right, let's just have, the Civil Rights Act, excuse me, didn't just suddenly just because, well, let's just have one. No, they were putting in that work since, long before 1954, because mind you, they've had several civil rights, bills and stuff before that, but this one was very different and changed a lot. And so now we're here today, right? And there's always been that continual fight, but what's different, just for me, just besides just the people, just seems to be the energy, and that it's not going away. Now, we're not going to hear about it a lot on the news, but people are more organized. They're not just social media warriors anymore, social media warriors anymore. They're actually doing concrete stuff. And as you continue to do that, when the next flashpoint hits, which it will, there will be another Ahmaud Arbery or George Floyd. There will be something,
I
right,
swear.
where people will be, will rise up in larger numbers. But now we'll also have things in place, policy, actionable items in place to execute on that, which we're seeing now. Like, I mean, I did an interview the other day, and they were like, "Well, what do you think about defunding the police?" I said, "I think it's brilliant. The very fact that we're even having a conversation about that means it says everything." Now, so I mean, it's now whether you agree with defunding the police or not is a different thing, and what you think that means. And some people are like, "This is a really bad messaging, marketing message." But guess what? It makes you think.
Right.
Well, it certainly makes you go and do some research because I had never heard the
Exactly.
term before. I Googled it and began to find out more about it.
Right.
Excuse
We're
me.
off track, maybe, I don't know, but
So you actually made a really good subtle point that I'm going to expound on just a little bit. This is not America's first rodeo. This isn't even the first civil rights rodeo, even
I
within the last
swear.
100 years.
no,
So I mean, we have things like John Brown's attack on Harper's Ferry, the whole abolition. I find Americans are very good and very skilled and adept at compartmentalizing and putting things in silos
right,
and then not connecting the dots.
right,
So we have John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. We have the Quaker abolitionists. Then we have a whole series of slave rebellions. I mean,
mhm,
Nat Turner
Nat Turner.
was fighting for his civil rights, plus everyone else who was like him.
right,
Donnie and I have ancestors or family members who were
Who died?
killed, who
Mm-hmm.
literally died in the 1800s just to be able to vote.
mm,
And they were
Yep.
literally shot on the side of the road, a dusty road, and left there like dogs.
right,
Or they were actually taken to trial because of an overall riot. So you
mhm,
have it's
Mm.
like it's a whole slew of things, but that's a story that I can send to you because
yeah,
that's a crazy one.
yeah,
But it's we've seen it. We've now, I guess the thing about genealogy is that it allows you to see that part of history that you've missed. And you're always taught a certain thing in history, and as African Americans we don't see us in
right,
history, in the American history. And then I can remember talking to some family members when they were asking me questions, because Brian and I always get asked questions and things of that nature. And one person came back and she was like, yeah, we don't get to hear our history, and we don't get to know our history. And I'm listening to them say this, and I said, yes, you do.
mm,
And they was like, what do you mean? And then I explained to them that I'm a great three times great grandniece of the man who beat the abolitionist Charles Sumner on the Senate floor. That was my uncle that did that. So guess what? That was my family that I was learning about. But because they don't go into all of history and only tell you parts of it, because truth be told, they don't even say his name, or at least they
right,
didn't say his name when they were teaching it. Because I think you and I are about the same age.
mhm,
And they didn't even say his name in school. All we knew was Charles Sumner. We didn't know who the man was that beat him.
right.
So
Well,
it's that kind of stuff.
yeah, and with that genealogy in particular, I mean, it creates that personal connection
Mm.
for all of us that makes it very real, and that and again, it's like you're saying with this, Levon Brown actually doesn't like the term Black history.
I don't either.
He prefers it's the
Mm.
Black experience in American history.
Yep.
Mhm.
Now, because all too often here, at least in the States, Black history begins, some sort of, it only begins when it's in America, as if Black people didn't exist in Africa, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's no history there. Um, but that the Black experience in American history, and all too often the way we see history, at least in the States, is these two parallel tracks. Um, that aren't actually on the same plane. So you have white history, which is what we're taught, and then Black history. It's like, no,
No.
for us
It's
to
history.
completely, really, truly understand how all this fits together. Because, like, look, I mean, believe me, white people really struggle to understand how they fit into slavery, which is shocking. Slavery exists, but they don't see themselves as part of that equation. Those are just those sort of people, white slave owners, but that's not me. And they can go, well, I never owned any slaves. Well, yes, but there's this deeper connection of going, they don't see white people actually involved in all the bad parts of history, right? Um, and so by putting those pieces together, and that's what we do in the film, The Uncomfortable Truth, is by using family history, we're able to see, all these touch points throughout of how we're fitting in,
Right.
and just how interconnected all of us are,
Right.
in that history.
I
And
get.
you bring. Go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to comment to what you said, Dania. I kind of get why non-white history isn't incorporated in American history. It's because the history of non-white people is like a Scud missile to the myth of American exceptionalism.
Oh yeah.
So you have, Black history, Chinese Americans who built the railroads. You had what happened to the Japanese. Then you have Spanish-speaking people in the southwestern part of the state and West Coast and what happened to them, and it just goes on and on and on. So that's why it's not included.
But
Right.
that doesn't make any sense to me, because those railroads, and I guess I'm getting ready to start sounding like your mother, because literally speaking,
Don't get
those
me started.
railroads didn't just appear there. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
They didn't just happen. You need to tell me how all of a sudden the B&O Railroad popped up and we're riding across it. That doesn't, it really doesn't make any sense. I've always liked history. I liked history when I was in school. I was one of those nerdy type people that would like stuff like that. But I
Yeah.
also always knew that something was actually missing. I always knew that this didn't happen without something else going on. And it wasn't until I started doing my research that I saw the other stuff that was going on in order for me to understand the rest of history. And in my opinion, American history as a whole is beautiful because all of those things happen. Because I mean, I don't get me wrong, I hate slavery, but in the midst of that slavery
Mm.
came giants, both
Right.
black and white. You understand what I'm saying? And all colors.
No, there was I was at a conference, gosh, probably about 3 years ago. It was the Association of African American Museums, AAAM conference. It was in DC. And an African American lady came up to me about my age. And, I had a booth there, my mom's information, our foundation, right? And, and so she said, when she, thanked me, but I knew she was really thanking my mother. But she then said, when I was going to school, when I was in elementary school, I was the only black kid in my class. And when we talked about, when the topic of slavery came up, everyone looked at me. And she said, and that's all I ever saw myself as. That was
Right.
all I thought we amounted to. It wasn't, the Sojourner Truths and the Harriet Tubmans and such. It
Right.
was just, just people who were enslaved, less than, right?
Right.
Is how she saw it. And even though her parents might have taught her something different, I mean, the impression of the authority figures in school, what you're reading in your textbooks, and plus kids don't listen to their parents anyways, your classmates. Now, the thought that came to my mind when I was speaking with her was, if that's how she saw herself, imagine how her white students, her white peers saw her.
But
Right.
see, but like Levon said, in
Mhm.
because you and Levon had this conversation on the podcast, and I agree with him on the podcast. We don't know our history.
Right.
So what you making the comment of, well, depended upon what her family. I told you I was hollering at the screen when I was because I had it on my I had it on my Roku TV while I was doing some other work. But I was like, right, Levon, right, because we don't know. We really don't know our history. We don't know enough for our families to actually teach it. My children are lucky because I am doing what I'm doing, and they can go to school, or when they were going to school, whoop, whoop, that they could say, well, you missed this part.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't say this part, or you didn't do this part because my mom taught me this.
Right.
So they have that. But so many of our, families, my mom is 83. She didn't know a lot of the stuff that I've taught her now.
No, well, and the fact of the matter is, I mean, and there's this, assumption amongst white people that, well, of course, black people know black history, right? I mean, the only reason we're learning this is so white people can hear it. And it's like, well, my response to that is, well, how much, what are you? And they're like, well, I'm Irish. Okay, well, how much Irish history do you know?
Right.
But I don't know any. Okay, so why would you expect a black person to know, the history of Africa or the history of the black experience here in America? Just out of default. It's
Right.
just it's just absurd. But it's also a reflection of our education system and how
Hmm.
that plays. I was gosh, I always forget the name of it was a university in Baylor, that's in Indiana, right? So
Indiana.
so I was speaking at Baylor University and a group of college students in this massive whiteboard, right? And I said, you know what? Let's do a quick test. Start naming famous people in history. Just famous people. Let's go, right? So the George Washington was the very first one. I'm like, oh, okay. So I wrote George Washington. I look back and they're like, Beyonce. I'm like, okay, Beyonce. All right. We went from George Washington to Beyonce, but okay, I didn't qualify this. All right. So let's go. By the time we finished up like 2 or 3 of these panels, we took a look at it, and 70% of the people on the board were white
Right.
men.
Yep.
And I said, now interestingly enough, obviously we know that, women make up half the population, but yet 70% are white men. And the fact that I didn't say US history, but that whites are also minority in this world, what does that have to tell you? So that we're centering this whiteness. But that by the time you graduate from high school, white people should feel really, really good about themselves. And that there creates this false sense, without
Hmm.
even having to say it, of superiority,
That's
because
superiority.
that's
Yep.
all you've heard. That's so you're instantly elevated. And
Yep.
that's why I think it's so hard for people, for white people to hear this. Any what they think is, some I've been accused of rewriting history, and I'm like, that's right, I'm writing it back to what it should have been. If you know the history to begin with, but the idea that someone but a white person would have invented something
Hmm.
is it becomes just, most people politely won't say anything about it, but in their heart, they just that tension builds up, and it's like, well, wait a second, why? It just blows their mind.
But as
Hmm.
Donnie and I always say, there's room enough for everyone's history
Right.
to be covered in history classes.
Yeah.
Now you because one of the things that really irritates me is the whole I don't see color, I'm colorblind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I am 12th generation American. Whether that's you look well, Native American, it's going to go beyond that, but just white and black ancestry, 12th American.
Right.
I wear my skin color like a badge of honor because I come from 12 generations of enslaved. Not all of my African ancestors were enslaved, some were free, but the bulk of them were enslaved. I come from 12 generations of enslaved survivors. They
Right.
were tough, mentally tough, physically tough, spiritually tough. And for me to deny this is
Right.
to deny 12 generations of everything that they went through. And I'm still arguing about that with my white classmates. Well, we don't want to see color. I'm like, well, then you're dismissing a large part of my heritage.
Right. Yeah. To not see color is just is just a way of it's I mean, it's the white way of saying I'm not a racist, but obviously it's the wrong way to say it. Um, it's this dismissal of, it's the gosh, I had this conversation today with this guy. It was, I mean, it's the I have a dream, right? It's the I'm not going to judge you by the color of your skin, just by the content of your character. Well, that sounds beautiful, right? I said, now what else did Dr. King say that day? He's like, what? I said, okay. Well, about the debt that was due.
Right.
He's like, what? I was like, yeah, go read the rest. You won't be quoting Dr. King anymore. Trust me.
Yep.
But this idea that this colorblind society where every look, we've arrived. I think as we say that in the film. Slavery ended. Dr. King had a dream, and Obama was elected president twice.
Right.
Congratulations, we've arrived. We are now just a colorblind society. Um, but the fact of the matter is that by not seeing, by claiming you don't see that color, what you're really not seeing as well are the struggles and the issues that still exist today that are associated with color. And so you put on these blinders, um, and it sounds good, but it's just a euphemism.
So
At
I,
the end of the
I,
day.
I want to go real quick because the show is almost over. So I
Oh,
want you to really talk about your foundation, and so people can know more about it.
oh, all right. Yeah. So the foundation is the Joan Trump Power Mulholland Foundation. It's a mouthful. Named after my mom. She said I didn't ask permission. I was like, no, I just asked forgiveness. It's easier. Um, we exist to end racism through education. That's our goal. We do this through the films. We have a curriculum that we use as well. The podcasts, all those things add to this continual education. Um, and so that's the space that we sit in. And part of it's telling my mom's story and the story of the civil rights movement in general. And part of it's things like voter suppression that we have. We have a film that we haven't released yet that's about the Evers family. So Medgar Evers and his family. It's the first of the civil rights leaders that was assassinated. I'm finishing up a film on Emmett Till as
I'm
well.
waiting for that one.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. I'm looking forward to it as well.
Hopefully, I'll be able to watch it. I'm waiting for that one. I'm
Yeah,
such a sucker for kids, but
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And so we so yeah, that's what we do. And part of what we have is a campaign that's called A Million Students for Change. Where we're working to provide curriculum on the civil rights movement and how kids can make a difference, um, in their world, change their world. Um, and we do that through a sustainer model, kind of like an NPR model. Even $5 a month can provide curriculum for 30 students. And I know we're over 30,000 at this point. I just have to update
that's
myself. So
is
yeah,
what I would like for you to do is send me the link to that so
yeah,
we can put it
yeah.
in the comments because I forgot to get that from you. But
Oh,
if
look,
you send,
jtmfoundation.org.
I can write it in right now.
Yeah, jtmfoundation.org. Gets you right there.
Because again, that's been the beautiful thing in terms of my genealogical experience is again meeting cousins of different races, kind of finding out that we have some family quirks that are the same,
mm,
which is always kind of nice to kind of find out.
yeah,
But just that kind of cultural exchange, like explaining to some white Tennessee cousins what the talk Black parents have to
right,
have with their children, that
right.
that that really is a thing, kind of the script that we have to use, and that just blows their mind.
Hmm.
Right.
You know, you can actually see, and I can actually see them sitting there, just letting the wheels turn and just kind of
Yeah,
absorbing that that's a reality for people.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we assume that people understand that, would know that. I mean, gosh, if you live in America and you watch the news, clearly you've heard about the talk, right? Even as a white person, right? I mean, it's like, come on, everyone knows this, right? And there's a frustration level that comes with that as well. How do you not know this? How do you not know this history, right? Um, and yet, clearly, that's the case. That a lot of people just don't know it, black or white. And just because the internet exists doesn't mean, and every last bit of information is on there, that we know that we know it, or that we're drawn to it. A lot of people are just trying to live their lives, pay their bills. I use the example of, look, I mean, do either one of you know how to strip an engine on a car?
I
Mm-mm.
used to.
You do?
I would be a
No,
bit
I
rusty.
I don't get my fingers dirty. That's
Right, right.
uh-uh.
Well, why not? Because the fact of the matter is that exists on the internet. You can go to YouTube right now and find videos about how to strip an engine. So
Mhm.
technically, you should already know how to do that. And that's kind of the argument that's made. Well, how do you not know about this? It's like, well, guess what? I don't care to know about stripping an engine. And if racism is not in the forefront of my brain, which is amazing that it's not, for people. I mean, there's like, what are the things we're never supposed to talk about, right? Sex, money, and politics. And then
Right.
we throw in religion, and then now it's also throw in racism. We're never supposed to talk about it, but yet these are the social constructs, in particular, that impact our lives on a daily basis, and we should be talking about that and should be comfortable talking about it, and having these open conversations, but giving people a space, also a willingness to learn and to grow and to make mistakes. I'm sure I said something today that probably the people are going, "Oh my gosh, did he just say that?" Yeah, I'm human and I'm a white guy. I mean, good grief. We're gonna make mistakes along the way, and we got to be willing to allow people to learn and grow from that. And some people don't want to learn. Some people don't want to grow, and you just okay. I'm looking for those who want to change. And
Well,
with that,
as a
grace of
as an
God.
as an almost closing question,
Mhm.
do you think Americans like to have things easy in terms of, because growth, I would almost say proper growth should be uncomfortable. It should
Mhm.
make you feel uncomfortable. Some of my best growth moments in life have been challenging really deep, hard-held beliefs.
Yeah.
And I'm open to that. But do you think that that's part of the American problem is Americans don't like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's an American problem. I mean, at least based on the narrative that I know, I mean, in respect to America, we've always rolled up our sleeves and gone to work and rah rah rah, and those sort of things. Uh, but and I don't want to discredit people today going, just because we got the internet, and everyone's got their phones and they're constantly looking at it, that we're just lazy playing video games and whatever else. Um, we work hard. I mean, we are the hardest working, we work more hours in the first world country than anywhere else,
Oh
anywhere
no,
else.
no doubt about that. But in
But
terms of doing like deep introspective work and
deep
like on the
retrospective,
topic,
yeah, yeah, it's yes. I think it takes a lot of work and a lot of time, and a lot of passion. Um, it's easy to go to church for
mm,
for an hour or two a week. It's a lot harder to read your scriptures every night.
Hmm.
Right? And so it's that's what Cliff Notes were made for, right? I don't
Right.
gotta look at that. But honestly, that's why I did the film. Nothing I did in the film is new. I mean, I actually even show all my sources at the beginning of the film. Here's all the books I used. People ask me
Yeah,
all the
you
time, so what
did.
books did you use? I'm like, did you watch the film? Because no one wants to read that sort of stuff. I should say
Right.
no one. I mean, I did. I mean, there's plenty of people who do. But for the general audience who's just dipping their toe into things, this is the first step. And that's what the film was designed for, to give them that entry point where they don't feel they're being attacked, because it's telling my story, um, along with Yvonne's, but it's cushioned. And that opens up that exploration for wanting to look at deeper into things, which I've heard
mm.
from people who have like, wow, and I get people who are just like, what else should I read? Well, on our website, under the educators tab, we actually have a section of like, here's some suggested reading books and so forth.
Wow,
Oh,
that's
brilliant.
awesome.
Well, we have actually gone over time, and that
Oh, I'm sorry.
has no, that's our fault. I just don't want our producer to have a heart attack.
Yeah.
So
Thank
I
you.
want to thank you. Yeah. Go
Yes,
ahead,
thank.
Brian.
I was just going to give you just a quick thank you so much for joining the show and dropping your knowledge and speaking so freely, Danya.
Yeah, I wanted to say the same thing, and just to remind everybody to definitely go to the jtmfoundation.org, watch on Amazon Prime An Ordinary Hero, After Selma, Black, White, and Us, and The Uncomfortable Truth, and listen to the podcast because it continues the uncomfortable truth. It continues it on, and
It does.
I'll be screaming at the TV when you're doing your podcast as always. And if you can stay on when we go off, I would love to talk more with you if you can, just for a few minutes.
Oh, for sure.
But I want to thank everybody for being on, for watching us, for following us. And I think this is our last show, right? Our last live show, right?
Our last live one. So that brings season 3 to a close. And thank you all for sharing what we've been doing and videos and your comments and your questions. And we'll let you know when season 4 starts. It'll probably be September.
Right. So thank you guys. We'll see you guys like soon.